From being forced to pitch at lightning speed to making a massive change in fielding, here's the new baseball rules that might completely change this season. Some of these new MLB rule changes have both fans and players riled up and hot under the collar. One of the rule changes ruffling a lot of feathers is the all-new pitch timer. From now on, pitchers will only have 15 seconds to throw a pitch when the bases are empty. If there's a runner or two on base, the pitcher will be given an additional 5 seconds to pitch. To do the math, that's 20 seconds. A 30-second clock will be given to pitchers between batters, and I hope pitchers find enough time to do their stretches and think of a strategy. As for the rubber they're standing on, some new rules have been applied to that too. Pitchers may step off the rubber twice per plate appearance without a penalty. Every time this happens, the clock restarts. Now, if the pitcher steps off repeatedly, it'll be treated as a balk. And yes, the clock resets if the base runner makes a sneaky move. The hitter, on the other hand, has to be in the batter's box with at least 8 seconds remaining on the clock, and they'll receive 1 timeout per plate appearance. So what happens if a pitcher violates the clock? They get charged with an automatic ball, of course. Batters aren't safe either, if that's what you're thinking. If they violate the timer, they're charged with an automatic strike. The only person who has the authority to make changes to the clock and grant extra time is the umpire. How many players do you think are signing up for a position switch? But a question that's on everyone's mind is, why the sudden change? And the answer is simple. The MLB's trying to spice up the tempo. They're aiming for quicker, faster-paced matches, which will definitely make games more exciting. Did you know the average runtime of a 9-inning game in 2022 was around 3 hours? That's only 12 minutes less than your average NFL football game. Not to belittle fans of the American pastime, but something tells me their attention spans aren't that long. Also, did you know these new rules have already been tested in the minor leagues? The average game ended up being 26 minutes shorter than the typical 3-hour runtime. So my question is, would you choose a Martin Scorsese film or 30 minutes to spare for the ride home? Bad analogy, sure, but the answer is pretty clear. The new pitcher time rule might be a good change for the game, but how will it be enforced? A pitcher will have to have his eyes on the clock and avoid any violations. Otherwise, he'll be costing his team a huge penalty. The same goes for the batter, which also needs to be in the box within the time range. Each stadium will have 4 new clocks, 2 behind home plate on either side of the umpire, and 2 more will be required in the outfield on either side of the batter's eye. Umpires will have communication devices to speak with one another. But guess what? The pitcher timer isn't the only massive change. Yep, they're adjusting the fielding too. As soon as a pitch is thrown, all 4 infielders must be on the infield dirt. 2 players will be on either side of second base and will put a lot of pressure on the batter. Oh, and they'll also be able to move as soon as the ball leaves the pitcher's hand. This is different in the sense that infielders who start a game on one side of the field can't switch sides throughout the game. All that has just changed, and hopefully for the better. So, if the hitting team reaches base and runners continue to steal one under violation, the game will continue with no penalties. And if the play had something like an out or a sacrifice, the hitting team can choose to accept the penalty. This would give an additional ball to the hitter's count. They can also decline it and let the ball stand either way. I get that this rule can come off as a little confusing, but once you see it in play, it'll all make sense. So, what's the reason for this change? Well, recently, the batting average has been pretty low. In 2022, it was down to 243. That's the lowest it's been since 1968. Fans have noticed that the low average is because of the lack of singles. Did you know the 2022 average singles per team was 5.33? Forget 1968, this is the 3rd lowest in MLB history. The previous 2 seasons are in the top 2 all-time list. These numbers aren't good. The minor league showed a significant change when the new rules were tested on them, and the batting average of lefties rose by 8 points. This was when shifts were regulated. When shifts were banned, the average rose by just 3 points. Still an improvement, though. It seems like with each added rule, the game's only getting harder and harder. First, a pitcher timer, then adjusting the infield shift, What's next? Is the MLB gonna make the bases bigger or something? Actually, yeah! That's exactly what they're doing. I'm not kidding. The bases are now 3 inches larger. They're 18 inches instead of 15. You might be thinking that this would put the runners at an advantage. The rationale behind this rule change was player safety. You wouldn't believe the number of injuries that happen when players try to steal bases. And although the minor leagues didn't show much difference in the first few months of testing the larger bases, the hope is that the new bases will reduce injury in the big leagues, which, of course, is a much more intense level of play. Maybe there's some good to this after all. Out of all these new rules, the timer's probably going to be the most challenging. And the infield shift can be just as big of a threat to some players. For example, Astros pitcher Luis Garcia got his signature move banned. His rock the baby move is a unique windup where he makes a bunch of unnecessary movements before pitching. Garcia lifts his leg off and on the rubber multiple times. So yeah, his signature move is finished. I observed Garcia in recent practice matches though, and it looks like he's adjusting just fine. Not only is it efficient enough to land a couple of strikes, but it's also much shorter than his original pitch. Did you know the original windup took over 20 seconds on average? How will he do that with timers all over the arena? Luis proved that he can also handle his pitch under pressure when the seconds are running out. When facing Mark Canha of the New York Mets, Garcia intended to throw a cutter, his best pitch by the way, and in the last moment, milliseconds before adjusting his arm, he threw a four-seam fastball instead. The ball didn't even graze the bat. I think that's more talent than adjusting to the new rules. But the Houston Astros pitcher isn't the only one suffering from the change this season. Bunt god Trent Grisham will have to switch tactics as well. When you're a lefty and you need to make the one-hit count, you can always choose a good old bunt. Trent might have to rethink that with the infield shift. The wrong angle just might have the ball landing on the opposing fielder's gloves. He's gonna have to work really hard on getting the ball over the grass, but it might do him some good. The San Diego Padres batter had one of the lowest averages of the season back in 2022. Bunts aren't always successful, and they have to be very precise to get the ball far enough for a run. Trent isn't the only one who's got his fair share of complaints about this particular rule. Pitcher David Robinson finds the new rule incredibly confusing. When asked for his opinion on the change, he simply asked, "How do you explain that to kids?" I mean, is he wrong? Dodgers outfielder Joey Gallo said none of the players had this growing up, and it definitely wasn't in the minors. So it'll be difficult to adjust. There you have it, sports fans. From being forced to pitch at lightning speed to making a massive change in fielding. Those were the new baseball rules that might completely change this season.